Hello, and usually we don't record in English, we just record in Portuguese here in this channel. But then on came The Edge of Democracy. The Edge of Democracy is a movie. I'm not gonna call it a documentary. You're soon gonna understand why. It's a movie on Netflix and it actually got nominated to the Oscars. And it might actually win. So on the off chance it wins, we thought it would be a good idea to have a video exposing to the rest of the world how it's not really a documentary and really just a piece of party propaganda that fails to get the basic facts right. And I mean, in a documentary, you have the possibility to go over facts and make your own interpretation of it and see, well, this is what I saw in this history. Well, okay, and I might disagree with that. The problem is when you get those basic facts wrong, when what you're affirming can be easily disproven in 12 seconds in Google if you speak Portuguese. And that's the problem. The movie can lead a lot of people that don't understand Portuguese or recent Brazilian history to believe that it's actually saying something that is right when it's not. I mean, the entire narrative is pretty much a piece of fiction, which is what the Workers' Party does and has done in the last few years at the very least. When confronted by facts that directly refute what they're saying, they will strawman you, ad hominem you, and then continue repeating basic mistakes basically until they convince someone or win an election. So we thought it would be important to explain this to non-Brazilians in general. Now, the movie actually portrays what happened before, during, and after the impeachment of Dilma Rouseff, and it has an underlying narrative that is all wrong. And the problem is that it gets basic facts wrong. It largely ignores the corruption scandals around the Workers' Party, Lula, and Dilma. It largely ignores the economic crisis going on in Brazil at that time. It strawmans the opposition, and it underplays completely the reason that she was impeached. In fact, it's barely even mentioned. Just so you get a sense of it. Okay, we have a few articles on it, the mistakes on it, and an article that helped me just create this video, but just so you get a sense of it, okay? They state that Lula, as a president, achieved the lowest unemployment in Brazilian history, which is wrong. There have been times where there was a lower unemployment. It says that he got into politics because there were only 2 congressmen that were working class people out of 443 congressmen. The problem is there never were 443 congressmen for there to be 2 working class men in them. It claims Dilma lost her prestige and her power because she stood up to the banks. She stood up to the big capital. Well, the problem is that during her government, she had a very high interest rate policy, which made banks make a lot of money. Her secretary of, it doesn't translate really well, but the Ministry of Economy, pretty much what is today this, he was caught selling secret information to those banks and then taking the money and giving to the party. And when she was reelected, she hired a bank guy to be her Ministry of the Economy. So, I mean, if that's standing up to the banks, what is aiding the banks? The movie also claims that Lula created Bolsa Familia. Bolsa Familia is just a money to the poor program, which is really that we're not going to try to give you food and shelter. Here's just money, okay? And it is a staple of Lula's government, Dilma's government, and the Workers' Party in general. And it states that Lula created it, which is not true. It was actually an amalgamation and expansion of previous programs by previous presidents. And Lula knows this because he is, in fact, on the record criticizing those programs when he was a candidate, saying that they were too small, etc. So he knows that. It's just another weird claim which serves really well to prove how bold the movie is to affirm things that are easily disprovable, is that they say that Michel Temer, which was the vice president to Dilma and president after she got impeached, it says that he was a traitor from day one since the re-election, which is not true. In fact, he spent a good part of 2015 trying to argue for her in Congress, and there are congressmen who were in Dilma's base saying, yeah, he's really good, it's actually helping us a lot, you know, thanks, guy. So And, that's just basic Google, and those are easily checkable statements if you are Brazilian, if you understand Portuguese, and etc. But the problem is that the narrative is really wrong, and for that I have to take you into some deeper waters here so you can actually understand how wrong it is. The whole narrative, which is implied mostly in the movie, I mean, we can take apart small mistakes and this and that, but the whole thing is, look, democracy was doing fine, democracy was growing and the people were getting better, and then came the big interests and they staged a coup on Dilma Rouseff, and after that democracy started spiraling down. And that's all a lie. That's just patently false again, and that's easily checkable. First of all, the claim that democracy was somewhat fine, or the Workers' Party was like this bastion of democracy, it wasn't. They got caught twice trying to subvert it. In 2005 came out a corruption scandal called Mensalão. It's a kind of shitty name, but it's what you get, I suppose. Which was... the Workers' Party was embezzling in public funds and using those funds to buy support in Congress. So it wasn't just, I'm stealing money. It is, I'm stealing money to get rich and to buy support in Congress to ensure that Congress supports me, which is a direct attack on the separation of powers and an attempt to subvert democracy. And they were caught again in Petrolão, which was in 2014, and it was the same corruption scheme again. Embezzling of public funds, except it was bigger by probably 2 orders of magnitude or something like that. Embezzling of public funds to buy support in Congress so you can rule unchecked. Twice, and by the same people. And in fact, one of the head guys on that was doing the second scheme while he was in jail from the first scheme. So... don't try to tell me they support democracy. They don't. They try to take it down and control power twice. Now, to tackle another important institution of democracy, not only the separation of powers, freedom of the press. The Workers' Party was always proposing some form of regulation of the media, whatever that means, and you know what it means. I mean, come on. But in 2004, because you can say a lot, but what they do, when they were in power in 2004, Lula sent a draft proposal bill. It failed in Congress for various reasons, but he sent a draft proposal bill to create a journalist federation board with powers to oversee and punish journalists. Now, why did you need that? Well, it might have something to do with the fact that a few months before that, foreign journalist, American journalist, came to Brazil and wrote a piece on Lula saying that he had a drinking problem, which he kind of does. I mean, there's footage of him before he got arrested. He was like lecturing to some people in this big truck, sound truck thing. He was like visibly drunk. Like people were trying to get booze out of his hand. It's like, dude, you have a problem, okay? So the reporter said, well, he has a drinking problem, and Lula said, well, we should revoke his visa and deport him. And some people told him, some aides told him, look, you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. His response was really ominous. Now, this is 2004. He said, fuck the Constitution. I mean, fuck the Constitution. Let me deport journalists who say I kind of can't hold my beer. Now, these are just 2 episodes in the beginning of his government. Pretty much every year, either him or Dilma or the Workers' Party in general were trying some way of, or drumming up support to regulate the media, as if it needed to. That's a blatant attack on the freedom of the press. And Dilma actually tried to do something which was a limited constitutional assembly, whatever that means, and nobody actually knew, and I hazard she didn't know as well, but to regulate the media and deal about media. So it's like, you want to change the Constitution? I mean, what is the emergency? We don't understand, and there wasn't one. They attacked the press the whole time. Even after she was reelected, the priority was regulate the media. They were attacking freedom of the press all the time. So to state that democracy was okay in the Workers' Party reign is at best disingenuous. I mean, at best. Now, how does the movie approach those corruption scandals? Well, those are pretty much just brief mentions. They're kind of there. it kind of rained yesterday. We had kind of a corruption scandal, happens sometimes. And they actually imply that Sergio Moro, which was the judge in the second scandal, Petrolão, which is now the justice minister, they imply that he was trained in the U.S. But as Roy Jones Jr. said, you almost forgot, because Dilma actually took the same training that he did in 1992. So if he's foreign trained because he did a course, by the CIA or mystical foreign powers, then wasn't she as well? Or did the teachers change or something? I don't understand. But the defense in general is what I said in the beginning of the video. You directly deny what happened, directly deny the facts, come up with something else, don't source it with anything, and shout it until eternity. You pretty much just say, well, this is just something made up to take down Dilma and the Workers' Party because they stood up to the banks. That's why they're in government right now and making boatloads of money, because she stood up to them. And that never actually existed. And there is actually a video of the court hearing when Lula was defending himself in Sergio Moro's court, which he asked Sergio Moro, how do you feel about having collapsed the construction industry in Brazil? And they failed to recall you that these construction companies who went broke were the ones in the corruption scandal. Now, since we're talking about construction, why was Lula jailed anyways? Well, he got an apartment as a kickback from one of those construction companies that was involved in the Petrolão scandal. They actually built a few stadiums in the World Cup. That was a silly idea. Why did we ever do that? But anyways, we know why we did that. It was just steal money. But anyways, the point is he got an apartment, and the movie says, well, that's what they had on him. He had an apartment. Well, no, he actually had some rural property that was reformed by another construction company, and he actually had millions in embezzlement and was the leader of the organization and was implied in many other investigations, and they were already in court. So to say that they just had an apartment, really. That was also why he could not run for president. The movie says that Sergio Moro took him out of the elections when he convicted him, which is disingenuous at best. Again, the fact is that there is a Clean Bill Act, or a Clean Record Act, you could say. That is, when somebody is convicted of certain crimes, corruption obviously being amongst those crimes, you cannot run for office for 8 years or something. And you know who sanctioned that law? Lula. So he was convicted of corruption in an appeals court, because Sergio Moro was the first instance judge. You have to be convicted in an appeals court, the second instance, for that to count on that Clean Record Act. So even if Sergio Moro convicted him, that didn't mean shit for the law. He would still have to be convicted on the second instance, where 3 judges not only affirmed the Sergio Moro sentence, but actually raised the years that Lula had to serve. So they actually thought Sergio Moro was too soft on him. And again, Sergio Moro couldn't do anything. The law was already the law. He was just saying, okay, you actually are a corrupt guy. Now go check with those guys and then see if you're boned or what. That was it. So to say that Sergio Moro took him out of the race is... And incidentally, Lula is only really free because the Supreme Court voted to reverse an understanding on the law. In Brazil, the Constitution is kind of messy. Well, kind of messy is a bit of an understatement. But the thing is that there is a disagreement when you can be arrested for a crime. And the understanding was, if you're convicted in an appeals court, then you can still defend yourself, but you go to jail before you do that. And the understanding was switched from the second instance to the final appeals in Supreme Court. So unless you're in a violent crime or something that requires you to be in jail because you're a threat to the public or something, you can defend yourself until you defend yourself in the last appeals in the Supreme Court. Now you can imagine the Supreme Court is jam-packed with lawsuits of that. Yes, it is. So that means that you're pretty much never going to jail. That's it. But why did they change the understanding? Well, let me give you just 2 hints. Of the 11 Supreme Court justices, Dilma and Lula appointed 7 of them. And the current president of the Supreme Court was his campaign lawyer. He appointed his campaign lawyer. Imagine if Trump did that. Imagine if Trump goes out and appoints his campaign lawyer to the Supreme Court. What would happen out of that? That's what Lula did. So they reversed the trial and set him free. Yay. Now, coming back to the economy, it wasn't just the construction sector that suffered. The entire economy of Brazil collapsed. It was the worst economic crisis in Brazilian history. Just so you have an idea, and they just kind of barely mentioned that, there was some, economic kerfuffle going over there. Now, let me just give you the numbers. In 2015, the GDP shrunk by 3.8%. In 2016, the GDP shrank by 3.6%. Unemployment shot up from 6%, which was the lowest number, to almost 14% in 2017 after the impeachment, when the new economic measures started to kick in and get the unemployment down. National debt exploded because the deficit exploded. It went from 51.5% of GDP in 2013 to more than 80% today. And we just had pension reforms last year. If they hadn't been passed, if they hadn't been approved, Brazil would have gone broke. There was no way we would escape that jar of death that was set up by Dilma. And we're going to take like a decade to clean that through, to get everything out of that income back to the point where we're actually growing and fighting poverty again. And that was the result of economic and interventionist and expansionist policies. It was just Dilma trying to get the levers of the economy and saying, I'm going to pilot this and see what happens. Which brings us to, why was she impeached anyways? She was impeached for budget fraud. That's something that's barely also mentioned in the documentary that said, it was a coup. No, actually she broke the law, not only on the letter of the law, but on original intent, that there's a difference. You can read the letter of the law and interpret it as something, or you can see, well, why was this law made in the first place? And in both of those occasions, Dilma broke the law. What happened was that governors used to get state banks, use those banks to fund their things, and when their policies in government and the bank would go broke, they would declare the bank bankrupt. The depositors would get to stick to their faces. You get another bank, rinse, repeat, do that to eternity. And some reforms came in and said, look, that's kind of dumb, right? Let's not do that anymore, okay? And on came a lot of reforms, a lot of laws that set budgetary constraints. Here's what you can do, here's what you can do, and you cannot take loans without Congress approval. So what did Dilma do? Well, she used state-owned banks as if they were the federal treasury, which is the original intent of the law and a direct violation of the fiscal responsibility law. What she did was from 2009 onwards to use those state-owned banks to fund her policies, student loans, construction loans, those types of things, and didn't pay them back because they were doing something that was a government program. So the government should pay them to do that. So the whole paying part didn't happen. And by 2015, she had an outstanding deficit with them of 45 billion reais. Now, that's just under half of what you would have in the budget for education in the federal level that year. So that's not just some, change. That's some big money. And again, it started in 2009 to 2015. So it wasn't like a week-long snafu on balancing the checks. No, it wasn't. It was a policy that lasted for 5 and some years. So that's a crime, that's illegal, off you go. So democracy before the impeachment wasn't in a good standing. The Workers' Party was diligently attacking it. The entire impeachment wasn't a coup. She actually committed a crime and screwed up the entire economy in the process. And, well, afterwards, is democracy under threat afterwards? Well, Michel Temer, they said, there were protests against him as well as they were in Dilma. Well, yeah, just minor point you might have missed there, okay? The protests against Dilma drew some 2 or 3 million people, depending on the date. Now, the protests against Temer brought in 48,000 people, so that's like a big soccer game. That was that. So, yeah, there were protests. Yeah, there were. Okay, that's not a fair representation. But was he a threat to democracy? No, he was not. Okay. Was he corrupt? Well, he's not convicted of anything. so I can't say for sure. But the consensus of the population is big old yes. Yeah. Now, he got recorded in a lot of stuff. He was an ally of the Workers' Party who embezzled funds to buy political support, like of Michel Temer. So, big yes. Yeah, everyone believes he's corrupt as hell. But he did not attack the institutions of democracy. There's a difference between a thief and a dictator. Okay, so implying that he attacked democracy, that's not gonna happen, son. Now, what about Bolsonaro? Well, Bolsonaro's history is still to be written. He has said a lot of stuff. Yeah, he had some really silly ideas. He actually once talked about court packing, which is what Franklin Delano Roosevelt tried to do after some of the stuff on the New Deal was thrown out as unconstitutional. He tried to nominate judges so the court was in favor of him. Yeah, Bolsonaro talked about doing this. He talked a lot of stuff, but he hasn't really actually done anything about the institutions of democracy. He has done some silly stuff, which seems really minor, close to what the Workers' Party did. Well, but he might do stuff. Yeah, he might. He might do something, but he hasn't done anything. His history is not written yet. So to say that he's a threat to democracy, well, he has some power, of course, okay, and he has some ideas. He hasn't acted on any of them mostly, while the Workers' Party has their history very well written in the records of courts and of jails. So to compare both, just not honest, dude. Not honest. But then you have the last Hail Mary argument of the movie that I think is the major arguments that are worth mentioning here. There are many others, but let's try to keep this under 4 hours, okay? Or a year, just explain the hours of the movie. But anyways, the last Hail Mary argument is, well, but at least the Workers' Party gave the old college try on fighting inequality and helping the poor and common man. Well, let's see about that, because those facts disagree. Well, they kind of say that they brought people out of poverty, but they did that in large part because they actually changed the line of poverty to be far lower. So, I could do that if they gave me some pens and some paper, I suppose. It's not a lot of big things about that. And the big thing is inequality. Well, they fought inequality. They stood up for the poor man against the big man. Well, then again comes those numbers and statistics to kind of mess things up a little bit. Well, inequality, the Gini index, was already falling in the government before Lula, which they criticized heavily and asked for their impeachment 4 times a day, pretty much. It was really silly. It was like, Fernando Henrique has woken up, impeach him! That's okay. When Dilma gets impeached, coup. Okay, I suppose. You have the right to troll in politics, I guess. But inequality was already falling in the government of Fernando Henrique from 1994 to 1998, the second term. And it kept on falling at pretty much the same rate during Lula's reign. So it kind of shows that he hasn't added much to the mechanisms that were trying to get inequality down. And when Dilma got reelected, well, she was controlling a lot of state-controlled prices before, electricity prices and some stuff. After she was elected, she was like, okay, I won, so prices go up again. And prices went up, inflation crossed 10%, and inequality came up again. So yes, you have reduced some inequality, but you kind of botched it in the end, and it kept going up after you because it's the mess that you left to everyone. And you can say, oh, but it kind of went down. Yeah, but when you kind of step back a little bit and watch the graph, it's really a straight line. I mean, it came down from 58 to a low of 52, so it's not so much. And when you look that through the decades, inequality kind of goes there. You haven't made like a big dent and change, and you did like that thing over there and started to undo it before you got impeached, and it's now largely undone because of the mess that they left. I mean, you can do some, kind of cool policies when you can, defraud the budget, use state-owned companies as your treasury, when you can buy support in Congress. You can do some stuff. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. You can do some stuff for like 5 or 10 years. Is that sustainable? No. And the mess that they left behind is going to take, like I said, the decade to get through, to get growth back again, and to get the poor rising up again after they were hammered down into poverty by Dilma's economic crisis. So even that Hail Mary argument is, look, dude, no. You haven't done squat on that. But like I said, we have 2 articles on that. They're both linked in the description. They're in English for your convenience. And we're going to return to videos in Portuguese unless, I don't know, who knows, I suppose. Maybe I'm going to do videos in English sometimes. Oh, whatever. We'll decide that later. Well, I guess that's that. I don't know how to do my outro in English. Kind of doesn't work, so bye.